Okay, you're live.
All right, Brian, I can go ahead and kick off if you are ready. Okay, I would like to welcome everyone to our virtual public meeting. The presentation is starting now, and just wanted to let everyone know that to make a comment at the end of the presentation, you can click on the hand icon button in the bottom right of your screen. If you don't see that, you can click the participants button, and then that should pop up. So questions and comments will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Again, you are here for the Sanitary Sewer Extension Area 1B project. It's June 22nd, 2021. And we are going to go over just a few ground rules first before we go ahead. I want to let everyone know that this is a public meeting, so everything will be recorded and is a matter of public record. Brian, if you could advance to the next slide so
Sure.
I can remember my rules. Thank you. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. As I mentioned, please keep comments, concerns relevant to this project and as specific as possible. When making comments, please keep them respectful. Demeaning, derogatory, or inflammatory comments will not be responded to. And there may be instances in which we will be responding to questions via email or in person after this session if needed. My name is Lindsay Weisenauer. I'm the Public Affairs Officer. I will be handling any questions at the end of the session. And we do have a variety of staff members here for you tonight to give you a presentation. We are joined by City Engineer Paul Hammersmith, Deputy Directors of Engineering Brian Gable, who will be presenting shortly, and Aaron Stanford, Senior Civil Engineer Ken Richardson, and last but not least, our brand new Chief Operating Officer, Robert Rands. This is his second day on the job and the second night in a row that he is attending an evening meeting. So letting him know right off the bat how committed we are to public engagement here in Dublin. And with that, I will turn it over to Brian, who has your presentation for the evening.
Thank you, Lindsay. Glad everybody could join us this evening. Advance the slide here, sorry. As Lindsay mentioned, my name is Brian Gable. I'm one of the Deputy Directors of Engineering for Dublin's Engineering Division. Tonight we're going to go through and talk about the sanitary sewer extension on Trails End, referred to as Area 1B. So just a brief agenda tonight. We're going to talk history and background. We're going to discuss, how to make our connections to the sanitary sewers, and then we'll move into project scope. And lastly, we're going to talk about some potential roadway options. So we'll jump first and foremost into history and background. So brief items of note. In 2015, a city council policy was put in place and enacted by the members of council to provide utility extensions to underserved areas within Dublin. So you can see in the map on the right here, all the areas with the leaders pointing to them are areas that are underserved. So orange are areas that don't have sanitary sewer, green are areas that don't have water, and purple are areas that don't have access to either. So as we mentioned last slide, 1B is the focus of the meeting tonight. I'm sure all of you are aware as you're residents in that area, which is essentially Trails End Drive almost entirely. So the project is going to be 100% funded by the City of Dublin's design and construction costs for public utility extensions. Funding is proposed in the 2022 CIP. I say proposed only because that is something that is accepted by council towards the end of the year. So next year's CIP will be accepted by council at the end of the year. Modifications can be made up to that point. So we're pushing for installation of sanitary sewer in Area 1B for 2022. So that's very brief history. Obviously, there's plenty more that we can discuss, but we didn't need to go into entire detail. Welcome to answer any questions on that afterwards. So let's talk briefly on how to make the connection. So first and foremost, what will happen is obviously the project will come through, install the sanitary sewer. From there, the residences will be able to make the connection. So they'll first submit a Dublin right-of-way permit application. Then you'll submit a permit and plan for review and approval to the City of Dublin. Once those are accepted, then you'll apply and pay for the Dublin and City of Columbus sewer charges and fees. The sanitary services and water services are maintenance by Dublin, but they originate from Columbus. So Columbus has the plants that take care of our sanitary and water systems. Hence, that's how they have part of their fees here. So from there, once you have the approved permits and everything else, you can hire a contractor to install your service line from where it'll be left with the project. And then the contractor will coordinate those inspections with both Dublin and Franklin County. A couple things to briefly talk about. So the owner responsibility for the sanitary sewer. The sewer main itself is the city's responsibility for maintenance, but the lateral, once it exits the main for the sanitary sewer, is actually the homeowner's responsibility all the way from the main into and through the house. So property owners are also responsible for the tap fees and capacity charges, which is more of a standard bill. Private service lines from the main, like I said, to their structure, and then any modifications that are made interior to the house would be something that the private resident would have. Meaning if you're switching from a septic and there was something you had to do to make that transition, your contractor would take care of that. But those fees, those costs would be borne by the resident. One thing that the City of Dublin is doing, we offer a waiver of 50% off of Dublin's tap fees and capacity charges for the connection, as long as the connection is made within 2 years of notification of availability. Meaning, once the sanitary sewer is fully installed on the street and residents are notified that they're able to connect to the sanitary sewer, there'll be a 2-year time that'll start from there to give 50% off of the tap fees for the City of Dublin. Unfortunately, that's not for Columbus's tap fees, as we'll get into on this next slide. So here's the current numbers. These do change slightly over time, so just take these with a little bit of a grain of salt. They could adjust from now to when the sanitary sewer is installed. But these are the current fees. So you see Dublin's charges and Columbus's total about $5,254. With the 50% Dublin waiver, we would get to around $4,149. As I mentioned before, there's an inspection fee, and then you'll have your own private contractors' construction costs as well. And that would be taking the lateral from your home all the way up to the main. So those costs can vary depending on what kind of system that you need to do, but they could be anywhere from, a few grand to much more if you have to go into a non-gravity fed system. So this is just kind of a visualization of what's each homeowner's responsibility. Since Trails End already has water, I'm sure most of you are very well aware that the water line up to the Corp Stop line is city responsibility. For us on this project, we're going to talk specifically on the sewer main, and from the sanitary sewer main, where that lateral makes a connection to the main is actually from there out is the homeowner's responsibility all the way up to the house. So there are some things that, as you're progressing and making these connections that you'll have to do, such as abandoning your existing treatment systems, extending the laterals, and making adjustments interior as needed. So once we finish or get moving along with the project and construction, our staff City of Dublin's engineering staff will send out a sanitary sewer lateral exhibit. This is something that you will need for your permit. Um, it's one possibility, I guess I'll say, of what could be done. This does not mean that this is the exact layout that you have to do, or it's also maybe not the layout that your contractor prefers or would like to do. So they may want to make adjustments to this, and that's okay. This is just trying to provide this service to you as a something to kind of help with putting together the permits and exhibits, et cetera. So these will get sent out once the project is actually under construction and you're getting closer to being able to make that sort of connection. So that way, we don't want to send these out, tomorrow or anything. If the project's not going to be constructed till next year, finished maybe at the end of next year, and now you're looking at a year and a half ago trying to find this one exhibit. So we'll wait closer till construction in order to be able to send these out so you guys actually have the most current and accurate exhibit that we can have. So big question we get often is, do I have to connect to the sanitary sewer? Well, the answer is no. The City of Dublin Code does not require connection to the public sanitary sewer system. However, there are multiple instances that may require you to make this connection. These are primarily governed by Franklin County Public Health, which would require if your existing treatment system is failing, leaking in some way, or is insufficient, or if you require replacement, should there be a sewer main within 200 feet of your property line, then Franklin County can actually make you connect to that sewer instead of installing a new septic tank. So that would be kind of a main caveat for this system. So sometimes, if you begin to experience some failure in your system or your septic tank, then you may need to make that connection. So there are several advantages, we think, to being able to have the sanitary system available and connected to your property. First is it improves overall safety and health of the entire area. This also helps with overall water quality so that you don't have actual leachate into the ground that makes its way, close to water lines. So this helps with quality. It also means less long-term maintenance. You don't have to have somebody come out and pump out or clear out your septic tanks or maintenance some of your grinder pumps or whatever else you have for your particular system. Having the availability to connect to sanitary sewer will potentially increase your home value. Obviously, as we all know, that depends on the market. And it's a opportunity to invest in what should be a permanent solution instead of one that would be a temporary solution should an existing problem or a problem arise with your existing system. So now I wanted to go and discuss the actual specific project scope for Area 1B. So this project is actually a combination of capital improvement funds. So we have the Sanitary Sewer Extension Area 1B, again, primarily Trails End. This was originally planned to be with Glen Cree in 2021. However, due to a variety of situations, we had to split the two of them out, primarily being funding. And we now plan for construction on Area 1B in Trails End in 2022. The remainder of the funds will actually come from the annual street maintenance program because we are also planning to reconstruct Trails End Drive. This has been in the program actually for a few years, intended to be coming this year. And obviously we want to make sure everything occurs in the proper timeline. So we want the sanitary sewer to be installed, then the street to be reconstructed to just ensure that we don't build you a new street and then tear it all out the next year. So we're going to combine the two, put them together, hopefully also then reduce the overall time frame of the construction on your property, and well, not your property, but on the right of way in front of your property. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with the location of Trails End Drive. And like I said, the area is primarily, or Area 1B is primarily Trails End Drive. It includes a couple homes near Summit View Road. So overall project scope currently is to install the sanitary sewer along Trails End Drive to uh, give service capacity to all the residents all the way down the street to the very end. Then we plan to reconstruct the roadway on Trails End Drive. It's kind of reached its usable life, and we need to do some maintenance on it and get a better, overall ride for the residents. Then there'll also be some crosswalk and striping signs on Summit View Road. And then currently the project is planning the addition of sidewalk with curb and gutter. And this is actually something that was based on previous neighborhood comments that we received into the City of Dublin's engineering department. The intent of this was to overall improve pedestrian safety and improve the storm drainage of the roadway. So this is something we'll certainly discuss as we come along here. But I wanted to just share a few photos that we've seen. So the current roadway is quite small. It's a maximum of 16 feet wide, and as I'm sure most of you are aware, a lot of the edges of the roadway have kind of deteriorated over time. You have deliveries and school buses, especially that try to traverse the road, and it's pretty difficult for those buses and vehicles and pedestrians to all be on the roadway at the same time. So, what the project is currently proposing, and this is only currently, um, is to, kind of just do some very minor improvements. And overall, the goal overall is to improve safety for both pedestrians and vehicles. So current roadway is pretty narrow. Like I said, it's kind of max 16 feet wide. Future roadway would be slightly wider. Nothing that would be incredibly noticeable other than it would prevent vehicles from tracking onto the grass in front of your homes. Current roadway also has no pedestrian walkway, and so we're proposing to put pedestrian sidewalk on one side of the roadway in order to alleviate the pedestrians having to travel on the roadway with the vehicles. It's also quite difficult in the current roadway for two vehicles to pass, especially as I mentioned with school buses. With a slightly adjusted width, we'll be able to ensure that vehicles can pass appropriately without having to get off of the roadway, or at least one of the vehicles to get off the roadway before the other can pass. So, and this is certainly currently not passable, with pedestrians on the roadway if you have two vehicles. So, with what is being proposed, there'd be space for the school buses, particularly to drop students off, so they could get off of the roadway and be able to walk down the sidewalk. And it would allow a walkway for students and or other pedestrians. So just wanted to show you a few things I think are important to mention in regards to the project. The sanitary sewer is actually planned to be installed on the west side of the roadway. It's the pretty dark black line you can see. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but it runs kind of left and right on the screen. So it's going to be on the left side or the west side of the roadway. The sewer is actually about 15 to 20 feet deep, and it's going to require a relatively wide excavation within the right-of-way. So reconstructing the roadway, even at the existing width, will require excavation beyond the edge of pavement as well. That's something I wanted to emphasize with the bottom picture here. So even if we kept everything precisely where it is now, which I believe is kind of degraded over time, the pavement edge is kind of rubbleized and turned more into gravel. When we come through and rebuild the roadway, regardless of how much or little you widen, we're going to have to excavate more than just the pavement width as it is right now. The base courses sit out a little bit, and then we also have cement stabilization that goes out a little further as well. So just because the edge of the pavement is here, we're going to have a few feet in addition to that in order to ensure that we can support vehicles, delivery trucks, school buses, whatever, along the roadway without having the last couple feet of the roadway deteriorate. So that's going to obviously impact some trees, some shrubbery, and landscaping that is within the right of way. So the trees, obviously, along the west side where the sanitary sewer will be installed, some of those are going to be disturbed or removed. We hope to keep as much of the existing trees as we can. That's something that we definitely want to prioritize with the job. So obviously, we plan to work with the contractor to minimize that as much as we possibly can. But once the sanitary sewer is installed, and as I mentioned, it's about 15 to 20 feet deep, there's going to be a relatively clear swath along the west side of the roadway, which would be a pretty good area overall, and it's what our desirable location would be for some kind of pedestrian walkway, whether that's a sidewalk or maybe a shared use path, whatever would be wanted or desired there. So the right of way overall on the west side of the road will be relatively clear once the sanitary sewer is installed. So with that, I wanted to drop into some of our potential roadway options and some items that we really want the residents' opinion and viewpoint of. So as I mentioned, we've kind of discussed what the potential improvements are, what we're proposing to do for the neighborhood. And we really want your input as the resident as to what you want to see happen with your roadway. We're looking for the next 30 years. This is not something we're looking to, do next year and then come back and put something in 3 or 4 years. This is the time now if we're going to do it. So, roadway, we don't come back and reconstruct the roadway generally for 30 or more years. It may get resurfaced in 15 or so, but that would be about it. This is a great time to be able to perform the work that's needed. So our current plan that we view as kind of the best option to both improve safety, allow for pedestrian facilities, improve the roadway drainage, and with putting a path on the left side or the west side of the roadway would help us to be able to save as many trees as possible. Obviously, we could put the sidewalk on the east side of the roadway, but that would impact more trees and probably is not that desirable overall. And on the bottom of this slide, you can kind of see, what the existing condition kind of looks like for a similar neighborhood. And on the right side, you kind of look at what could happen on Trails End, should that be desired. This rendering would have curb and gutter and the sidewalk on the left side, and would leave nice open green space, relatively not changing too much overall, but definitely improve safety for everybody. So what we're going to have, both on the website, the City of Dublin website for Trails End, and physically, we've already sent comment cards today. So you should receive those in the mail in the next couple of days, and they have these options on those comment cards, as well as spaces for your comments in general. If you have any questions or comments, we would love to be able to answer those questions for you. So you can kind of read what we're looking at here. So our first kind of question is, we're looking at roadway drainage. We really want to improve the drainage best we can within the roadway. We believe that curb and gutter would allow we believe that curb and gutter would allow us to have the best shot at actually treating and addressing a lot of that roadway drainage and ensuring that we reduce overall ponding and everything else on the roadway and adjacent to it. But obviously, we can go without the curb and gutter. That's something that we can do. Obviously, it's something that the roadway currently has. Utilize the ditches that are existing there. We can do our best with that to ensure that the ditches are sloped appropriately to drain to each location, but sometimes you don't have enough enough fall or enough slope in a grass ditch to be able to allow water to adequately flow off of the right of way and shed down into an actual ditch or creek. And then there's also obviously no preference on all these. So the second would be pedestrian safety facilities. First would be a sidewalk, or if you would opt for a shared use path, then no sidewalk or no preference. Just as a note, if no curb and gutter is decided, then the sidewalk option would likely be a shared use path. The city of Dublin doesn't really do curb and gutter, or it doesn't do sidewalk without the curb and gutter. So it's okay. We can figure that out and discuss through that, and certainly ensure that any of the homeowners' concerns in regards to where that path would be addressed. And then the third item we want your opinion of is tree replacement. Tree replacement. So we can replace the removed trees with the project, or we can not replace the trees, and then obviously the owners could choose to plant the specific types and trees that they want, or no preference, once again. So those are kind of the options that we're looking at. Once again, we would request that for the options that you have, we get one response per household in order to just make sure everybody gets their voice heard. There's some information on there, you give your name, address, phone number, email, so that we can talk with you if we have further questions or need. And again, this is available both digitally on the Trails End website for the City of Dublin, or it will be arriving by mail in the next few days to your physical address on the street. So you can use either one to submit your comments. We'd love to hear them. The question is, what's next? Well, we want these comments and comment cards within 30 days, which would be 30 days from today is July 22nd. We want to get these, review them, figure out kind of what the preferred option is, and then we need to get designing so that we can sell this project early in the spring next year, so that we can have the construction go off next year and just be done and not drag out for you as the resident. So that's what we're kind of asking. From there, you can watch for updated information on that particular website, the Trails End website. You can see the web address there to the right in green. And then once the project is in construction, as I mentioned before, we will send potential sanitary service lateral alignments and exhibits to you, so that you can use those to be able to submit your permits. So with that, that kind of overall ends our presentation aspect of this meeting, and we can kind of switch over into more of a questions and comments and discussion. And panelists, feel free to turn your video back on.
Thank you, Brian. And I do want to just go over one more time how to participate in this meeting. I do see a hand raised there. So if you want to make a comment or ask a question, please click the raise hand button in the bottom right of your screen. It is pretty small, so if you don't see it, just take a closer look there in the bottom right. And if you still don't see it, click participants, and you should see it there in the bottom right. I do see a few people are joining from mobile devices, and I looked on the app. If you click on the three dots button at the bottom of the app, that will bring up the option to raise your hand as well. So we will go ahead and one at a time call on individuals as we see your hands raised. And as Brian commented a couple of times, we also will be accepting comments through the mail and on the website at dublinohiousa.gov/trailsend. So the first person with the hand raised that I see is Kent Harris. And we will have to wait for Kyle. If you can go ahead and unmute Kent, he can have our first question or comment. Kent. Kent, you have been unmuted on our end. If you make sure that you're unmuted on yours, we'll let you have the floor.
If you can hear me, I cannot hear you. Give me 1 second.
Okay, we
Uh,
can hear you.
we can hear you now.
You you can hear me?
Yes.
We
First of
can.
all, tell
Yep.
me how to say your last name because I'm sure I butchered it.
Okay, great. Yeah, sorry, it was just a microphone issue on my side. Yeah, last name is pronounced Harrows, but no worries, even my father-in-law doesn't get it right, so no worries at all. Well, so first, thank you so much, Lindsay, for kind of kicking us off, and also Brian for walking us through the slides. That was helpful. As you may know, I sent an email to Ken today that several of us on the street kind of have talked and already kind of gathered some kind of informal feedback amongst us. So I'm glad to see you're sending out kind of the official survey, but we do have some kind of initial and unofficial kind of findings from many of us on the street, and I can kind of go through those. But in terms of questions, I don't know how you want to do this. I think I have several questions that are probably on the minds of all of us, so I can go through those as a group. I've not been officially elected the Trails End kind of conduit for this, but I'm happy to do that if you're okay with me kind of going through a range of questions, or if you want it to be more one question per person, we can certainly do it that way as well.
Lindsay, I think you're muted.
I was just going to say, Kent, you have the floor and you were the first one to raise your hand. So I am okay with you just going ahead and answering your questions. And then maybe maybe you'll, some other people will put their hand down after you answer one of their questions. So go ahead, Kent.
Sure. Okay. Thanks. So I guess in no particular order, maybe talking about the width of the street first. So um, there are, I think there are 20 owner occupied houses on the street, and in the little unofficial Survey Monkey survey that we did over the last week, 11 people did want the street to remain 16 feet wide as it is today. Another three people wanted it to be 18 feet wide. Another three people wanted it 20 feet wide, and one person was undecided. So again, that's 11 people or 11 houses for 16 feet, three for 18, three for 20, and one for undecided. So that's just, unofficially, I guess, kind of where we sit right now. One question about the street width is if any widening that happens, would all of that widening occur on the west side of the street, or would it be somewhat balanced between both sides of the street?
Yeah, so Ken and I have had some discussions on this. It's a little funny, only because the street generally is built on a center line, and then it's 50-50 on either side of that center line. Trails End in particular, probably just because of construction methods at that time, meanders just a little bit, which is okay, not a big problem. Our intention right now is to just, should there be widening of any kind, then we would obviously widen equally to both sides, obviously keeping everything within the right of way. So, it would be generally equal unless there's some sort of, kink that's right there. We would probably smooth that out a little bit, but the short version is yes, it would probably be just equal to both sides a little bit.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, your audio cut out a little bit, but I did hear you say generally equal on both sides, so thank you. Another kind of part about the street width is, well, I guess a couple things. Number one, I think, and again, this is not speaking for the majority, for everybody. I mean, kind of a majority with 11 people, but school buses have been going up and down the street here for 30 years, and yeah, sometimes people have to go into the grass, but I think more people than not kind of like the less wide look of the street, and I think part of that is due to the street having a very unique kind of country look to it, kind of a country look in the middle of a suburb, and a wider street, particularly with sidewalk and gutters, that starts to make the street look more like a subdivision, which is exactly what the residents of the street have opted against, by choosing to live here. So I think that's just one thing to keep in mind. And I know in some ways Glen Cree is maybe seen as an example of where we might want to, or where Dublin might kind of see us going. But again, I think for several people, kind of the look and feel of Glen Cree is not what is kind of really desired on the street here. So that's just a little feedback there in terms of the street width. So going next from street width to sidewalk, let me kind of read through kind of the results of that survey that, again, we unofficially took. We had 17 houses opposed the sidewalk and one being undecided and 0 kind of registering support for the sidewalk. But one other kind of thing around the sidewalk is that you mentioned kind of like the increased safety of a sidewalk. I would kind of personally say that, whenever there's a sidewalk installed, that then makes the property owner liable for shoveling that sidewalk if there are any, snowstorms or whatnot. So it does put us up to some elevated kind of legal risk if someone were to fall. So in some ways, not having the sidewalk is a little less risky from a homeowner standpoint. Oh, then I guess a question again around the sidewalk would be, you mentioned the shared use path. I wonder if you could define what that means. I'm not clear on what that is versus a sidewalk.
So a shared use path, basically just City of Dublin standards require us to, there's some general approved feels, I guess, or looks of the roadways. So sidewalks generally go with curb and gutter. If there's no curb and gutter, which is okay, our standards would, if a pedestrian facility is desired, our standards would then necessitate a shared use path, which is, instead of concrete, is asphalt, and it's a little bit wider. I'm not 100% sure on whether or not the rules change between sidewalk and shared use path in terms of liabilities. That's one, Paul, maybe you have a understanding of. I'm not 100% sure on that one.
I mean, they're treated one and the same. In front of a residential property, whether it's sidewalk or shared use path, the sidewalk maintenance falls on the property owner, and it's clearing of, snow and ice falls on the property owner. We don't go out and enforce that and patrol the city after a snowstorm to make sure they're clear. It's somewhat complaint driven. If it's a route to schools, for instance, we would take a look at that situation. Traditionally, we have maintained the shared use paths in front of residential properties and where they have occurred throughout the city. So that's probably the one distinction, is that overall, replacement in terms of maintenance. But as far as the general maintenance, again, no removal, debris removal, cleaning, sidewalk and shared use path are one and the same.
Okay, and I'm sorry, my audio on my computer is just kind of bad. I can hear you both fairly well, but not perfectly. Could you clarify if we kind of, for lack of a better word, vote on no sidewalk, are you saying that we would have to go with the shared use path, or is also no sort of sidewalk or shared use path, is that an option?
No, so the vote is basically, I guess you could say the vote is more between pedestrian facilities or no pedestrian facilities. So, it's kind of sidewalk or no sidewalk is more of the just general understanding of it. If the only reason I mentioned the shared use path, some people actually prefer that because it's a little bit of a different look and feel. Again, it's asphalt instead of concrete. Sometimes that blends in a little better with the scenery around. But the reason I bring it up is if you chose no curb and gutter, we're actually just per our standards don't install regular concrete sidewalk without curb and gutter. So if you wanted pedestrian facilities but didn't want curb and gutter, then that would put us down to needing to propose a shared use path for the roadway. So, but should you choose no pedestrian facilities or no sidewalk, then that just means no sidewalk.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks for the clarification. As long as we're on the curb and gutter, I know storm drainage has been kind of a perennial issue on the street for many people. I guess based on some research I had done, I was not aware that curb and gutter would be a significant driver of improving water flow, that water flow could still be fixed without curb and gutter. So could you speak to the necessity of curb and gutter to address storm water drainage, or maybe even a better question would be just kind of what the current plan is for stormwater drainage, with or without gutter?
Right. So with or without, we will do the best we can to make both work equally as well. Curb and gutter, just because it's a paved gutter, tends to flow more efficiently and it will dry quicker. It also means that uh, the dirt in and around the ditch isn't absorbing the water itself due to low flow or a low spot in the ditch, and will then obviously dry quicker as well. So you wouldn't have, I guess in my private home, I have wet areas in the back of my house because it has a swale. It just doesn't dry as much. But if that swale happened to be a concrete swale, the entirety of the swale would dry quicker, and the ground surrounding the swale would also dry out more effectively, rather than having to wait maybe a few extra days in order to mow right up against where the ditch is, if that makes sense. So it's not that one or the other could or could not work. It's more that curb and gutter certainly would improve that flow. It would allow to get the water away from the area quicker, and I think it would prevent the normal roadway pollutants that you would have from getting into the grass area surrounding the street where the ditches are. In general, ditches obviously have been used for eons and can work. They require maintenance. They require a certain amount of effort to make sure, both on the homeowner's part and on the city's part, to ensure that they are well graded and properly flowing. As Paul mentioned, we don't go out and check out after every storm event. Similarly, we don't always go out and check out who's installed landscaping in a ditch. So if somebody installs landscaping, that prevents the flow of the ditch properly, and would require that stuff to be removed and readjusted. Sometimes these happen, and we try our best to work with the homeowner to ensure that it gets properly addressed. We've also had some projects where we've had to go through and kind of go back through and reestablish some of these ditches. And there's actually a lot of homeowners that are not very happy about that. But in order to improve drainage for the entirety of the street, then you have to get these ditches back installed appropriately. And you can see kind of how there's pros and cons, and each individual homeowner may have their own preference. They might want a pipe or conduit there run and not have a ditch in front of their home. That's okay, but that is going to affect runoff from other areas, and that could cause ponding or drainage issues elsewhere. So ditches, obviously, like I said, can work. It'll require some general ensuring that we have maintenance and that has proper slope and proper flow as best as we're going to be able to. And then you also have to make sure the grass reestablishes. And then over time, it's just going to need maintenance to make sure that it continues to drain. So I know that there are a few, I guess I'll call them non-roadway directly related drainage issues that we're going to try to address one or two of those with this job as best we can. those were planned in a other job a few years back that
Okay.
got incorporated with this project. But outside of that, overall, we'll be sticking primarily to the roadway and trying to improve that. If there is a specific drainage issue adjacent or at your property up against the right of way, let us know and we'll see what we can do to address that with the project.
Okay. Thanks.
Probably the only
Next
thing I
question.
would-
This actually.
Probably the only thing I would add to that, and this is Paul Hammersmith, is, curb and gutter is commonly thought of as a street component, but its primary purpose is stormwater collection and conveyance. And our goal is to get the stormwater off the roadway and preserve our roadway. So whether that's curb and gutter, which allows us to do that pretty efficiently, or a ditch, as Brian mentioned, the difficulty with the ditches is they're very difficult to maintain over time. Folks tend to fill them in or regrade them, or just naturally they kind of lose their grade. So it's really an opportunity for us to preserve our roadway, but our primary purpose is both roadway stormwater drainage, and then also, as we can, we'd like to correct any other drainage issues adjacent to the roadway itself. It's not going to correct rear yard drainage issues that might already exist prior to our project. I mean, they're going to be each individual property owner's responsibility to correct.
I'm sorry, you said each individual property owner's job to correct the ditching? I guess I missed that very last part.
No, anything that would, if you have an existing stormwater ponding or a low area in your rear of your property, for instance, that would be you as a property owner's responsibility to correct. And this project is not going to address that.
Okay. Got it. Thanks. The next question, and I've got several more questions. So, and I know we only have like 12 minutes left. So, let me try to get through these a little faster. Next one came in via text message from another person who I know is on the call. She asks, will the city replace driveway storm culverts, or is that the owner's expense?
Yeah, there are several that are proposed to be replaced. So again, our work is anticipated to stay within the right of way. Obviously, when we remove portions of the roadway and go through driveways with the sanitary sewer, we will reestablish drive pipes to ensure that drainage will convey through and make sure that those are adequately sized as well. So if they're undersized now, we may try to increase that and adjust the ditch as needed.
Okay. So let me move on to what maybe actually the most important topic. I guess maybe I kind of buried the lead here by coming to this more towards the end of my questions, which is around the sewer line itself. So my understanding, again, from some research I did, is that the sewer line is going to be put in 12 feet to the east of the west property line, which would basically put it about 4 feet to the west of where the street ends today. And then my other understanding is that about an 8-foot wide trench will have to be dug that 15 to 20 feet deep in order to give the workers that distance they need for safety, which makes sense. But anyway, if you do the math on that, that means that basically from the western edge of the street today, there'll be a 15 to 20 foot deep hole that goes 8 feet to the west of where the street is today. And while that 8-foot wide span would only kill there's only one tree on the whole street that's literally within the 8 feet. But if you think about root systems and how those could be disturbed, that there's several trees kind of right at that 9 to 10 to 11, 12 foot distance. So there's actually 29 trees that are kind of within 10 to 12 to 15 feet to the west of the street today that I would say are maybe at risk of being lost by their root system being dug up. So knowing kind of the comment I made earlier about the country feel to the street and whatnot, it just I think begs the question of why the sewer cannot be installed underneath the street rather than to the side of the street.
Yeah, I think overall, installing that sewer in the center of the street would restrict entrance to the roadway to the residents during construction and any maintenance. It would also mean that if any resident ever had an issue with the lateral, they would have to, um, you know, on both sides of the roadway, regardless of who, would have to dig into the roadway and again, probably shut down the roadway for a time period in order to do that. So it helps with construction and ensures that we can also maintain direct access to your homes during construction while we're installing that sanitary sewer.
Thanks, Brian. Mr.
Yeah,
Harrows, if you want to ask one more question and then we want to move on to some other people and then we can circle back to you later. I just want to make sure we have a chance to address everyone who has their hand raised at this time. And I should also say that if you have your hand raised and your question has now been answered, you can go ahead and click the hand raise button again and it'll take that down. But yes, Mr. Harrows, if you want to do one more question for now before we move on. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks,
Yeah,
Lindsay. That
and
makes perfect sense, and I appreciate everybody's time on here and help. But I think someone was speaking.
Yeah, Ken, I was just going to say that the one last thing on that last comment was the measurements you were given. Just remember earlier, I kind of said the roadway actually does meander just a little bit off center line. So unfortunately, as a result, your measurements may be a little off on occasion. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, and I guess, and maybe my last question here that Lindsay gave me will be more of a comment that, given the risk of so many trees on the west side, I understand the kind of the risk of putting, even if it
Ken,
was
I lost you for a second, Ken. Sorry.
somewhat. Okay, hopefully you can hear me. What I'm saying is I understand the point about maybe not wanting the sewer line to be right in the middle of the street, but having the sewer line so far to the west really does put those 29 trees at risk. So if there's any possibility to have that sewer line run, somewhat closer to the street or just just within the first, few feet of the street rather than the middle, I think everyone would find a lot of value in that, because that would put all those trees at less risk of being lost. So with that comment, thank you for the time, and I'll turn it over to Lindsay.
Yes, thanks. And I'm not cutting you off at all. So you're more than welcome to stick around and ask any remaining questions. I just wanted to make sure we gave everyone a chance to ask their questions. So the next person, Kyle, if you can unmute Dan Schonenberg. Name's Schonenberger. Sorry, I was cut off on my screen. So Dan Schonenberger, you will be next, and it looks like you are unmuted. So go ahead.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kent, for your dissertation there. You have answered a lot of questions. I don't have a lot of them. One concerns the storm line work. And I know there was a Glen Cree master plan done a few years ago as to how to get some water from Glen Cree over to Wedgewood Glen. Is that plan going to be implemented, or a similar plan? Because I know there's several locations where, quite frankly, the water just goes across to the west side of Trails End Drive and kind of does a gravity route west.
Yeah, it kind of sits on your property. And you were working previously with Todd, I believe, on
Yes.
on some of those items. So that was one of the items that I referenced. That was on a stormwater improvement plan project that is intended to be incorporated with this work. So some of that discussion that you guys had previously, I believe is going to be incorporated with this project as well.
Okay,
Ken
thank
or
you.
Paul, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, Mr. Schoenberger, this is Paul Hammersmith, and
Yes,
yes,
Paul.
Brian's exactly correct. I mean, there was not a master plan done out here. We had a consultant come out and evaluate the concerns with stormwater runoff. And as you recall, several of us met with you last
Yes.
fall, I think it was, and talked about those improvements coming through your property. And what we
Yep.
discussed at that time is what we plan on incorporating into this project,
Yes, great.
doing at
Yeah.
the same time.
Yeah, but I do have a copy of a master plan for Glen Cree stormwater that was done by CDM.
It was probably part of when we did our
Bigger plan, yes. Okay.
complete citywide master plan, yes. I thought you were mentioning that there was a specific master plan
No,
done just for
no,
that
not at
neighborhood.
all.
Okay.
Brian mentioned, he showed a diagram that showed the homeowner who's responsible for the line from the sewer to their property. But I think you intend to do the taps out to the line of easement, do you not?
Yeah, so because we're reconstructing the roadway with the project, we really didn't want to build a sanitary sewer and then have each resident, or at least half the residences, based on where the line currently is, come and have their private contractor have to tear through the roadway itself, and then you would end up with patches every
Right,
other half.
exactly.
So yeah, so with the project, and that's a great question because I didn't answer it. We are intending to install the laterals up to the right of way,
Right.
or your property line, obviously.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, as a follow-on to that, will we have input as to where these taps are so we can hit the right side of the house and so forth?
Yeah, we would love to hear from every owner, where the preferred location, if you know where it is located. Overall, we generally can take pretty good engineering guesses based on your septic tank location.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the perfect place. So if you have a preferred location, we would love to hear that. Please put that on the comment card, or give one of us an email or a call, and we can certainly ensure that that occurs.
It's probably too soon to know now, but we'll be provided with the elevation in the street so we can determine if we need to do a gravity or a force main.
Yeah, and for the most part, not for the most part, the reason the sewer is as low as it is to be able to provide as many of the residents service to their basements as needed. So should you have washers and dryers or anything else in your basement, you would be able to have sanitary service with a gravity system for the most part. That
Right.
doesn't work for every owner. Some of the owners at the very end of Glen Cree, unfortunately, are so far away that a gravity system is not available for them. But that should work for primarily pretty much everybody on Trails End.
Just as a comment, I understand there's going to be some work done this summer on the south end of Trails End. Could you comment on what that schedule is so we know what to expect this summer?
Yeah, so that the Glen Cree project just sold. As part of that work, it's installing the main along Summit View Road. So most of it's going to be on the south side of Summit View. However, right in front of Glen Cree, there's property owners on both sides of the roadway that have quite a bit of what I guess what I'd say is the right of way is pretty tight at that location. So the sanitary will be in part of the roadway for a brief section towards the water tank. So some of you will be closed for a brief period, maximum of 10 days. The local traffic will still be allowed. So you residents and Glen Cree will still be given access to your homes. And then from there, we are also installing the stub, I guess I'll call it, from that sewer main onto Trails End. So that work actually, I believe, will stop either just shy or just into your property, Mr. Schoenberger. but it won't go very far, and it's not going to affect your trees with that job. So,
Yeah,
but
the
that's as
second
far as it
property.
goes.
Yeah, I'm actually the second property. I was told earlier you're gonna put the first 300 feet on Trails End. Is that still correct?
It's a little shy of that, but yeah, it'll be the first like 270, I think.
Okay.
Doing that from memory, so that could be wrong.
Yeah, it won't be on my property, but it will affect the residents because of construction.
Yeah, the first portion of that line is actually a jack and bore, so it shouldn't be too terrible other than the receiving pit.
Okay,
So there'll be a small area that the roadway will be reduced briefly.
great. That's all the questions I have. If Kent has time, I know he received some text messages that he could read. He wouldn't have to read who they're from, but it kind of explains some of the neighbors' sentiment on the project.
Yes, thank you,
Right.
Mr. Schoenberger. And
You're welcome.
the next names that I see are Michael and Anne. So Kyle, if you can unmute Michael and Anne, and you guys may speak in unison if you would like, but you now have the floor.
Lindsay, just so you
Hi.
know, it is 7:31.
Hi,
Go ahead.
this is Ann. Our questions are kind of quick, but a little bit lateral. With these changes, you're thinking 30 years in advance. Are you anticipating any density or zoning changes to our area?
No.
And some of my input for curb and stuff is informed by the city of Columbus's efforts to actually limit runoff water going directly into the rivers and being addressed through rain gardens and that sort of thing. Would what you're trying to address, I know in some of the yards and things that might be something, would rain gardens be not what they're putting in Columbus, but maybe something that's actually on the properties, help that and extend the age, the upkeep of the road, what you were addressing, instead of having the gutters and the extra concreting and those not very environmental solutions to this problem?
Yeah, so it's kind of a combination of items. I'll try to keep it fairly brief, but the curb and gutter, what it does is it helps facilitate moving the runoff off of the roadway, and to get to where it needs to be. Whereas ditches tend to over time retain some water. If that ditch tends to retain water too much or too often or is always wet, what we generally will see is the roadway will actually begin to what's referred to as pump, meaning it'll start cracking, it'll start fracturing, and then it'll start settling where tires generally will go. And so that's kind of the general upkeep of the roadway that we're kind of referring to. So with how the current drainage is on Trails End, even with curb and gutter, the outlets would still be to a location that ends up being, unchanneled or unditched or unpiped. It's not in conduit. And so then at those locations, we would install those kinds of BMPs that you're referring to, some sort of vegetative filter or whatever to alleviate any kind of pollutants or anything before it would reach anywhere near the river. So a lot of that goes overland flow for a short bit at least on Trails End before it gets elsewhere to other people's drainage.
Sorry, I just had another question, went straight out of my head, something that you brought up. Hopefully I'll remember it and I can send it in.
Yeah, that's okay. Comments are more than welcome.
Yes, thank you. And we have
Thank
one more
you.
hand raised. Yes, thank you so much. If you have your questions answered, you can go ahead and unraise your hand. I have one more hand raised, and that is from Shannon Michael, maybe? Shannon?
Yeah, it's actually Dan. I'm her husband right now. She's putting the boys in the
Hi, Dan.
bathtub. Thanks. Our question, it's kind of twofold, I guess, would be that if we're doing all this service and everything to the street and all these utilities are coming in, is there an opportunity at the same time to add potentially like a natural gas line as well? Because a lot of us here are either on electric heat or propane gas. And at that point, if we're digging up everything and tearing up the entire street and running all these things, natural gas, I think, would be the natural next step to as like an incentive, and as far as cutting down some of the other utility costs that we have, and making it a little bit more fuel efficient too, I think, overall. So that would be my question, I guess.
Yeah. So natural gas, unlike the water and sanitary, is actually a privately run utility. So what would be required would be they would need to know that there's enough committed interest for homeowners or residents that want to connect to that system. And if there are enough commitments, then they would likely be able to provide that service and then get up to that point. But that's kind of my understanding. They certainly would want that commitment kind of up front. And it's a private utility. But go ahead, Paul.
And we can reach out to them and ask them that question, but I mean, they do make that determination based on their own capital plan, and again, what they believe will be users in the end of making that improvement. The other thing I would say is, even after our project, if Columbia Gas would decide to do that afterwards, typically they directional drill their lines and they don't open trench. So it would be much less disruptive. So it could be done afterwards, but we're more than glad to reach out to them and ask if, make them aware of our project and see if they have any interest in, providing those facilities now.
Well, thank you. I'm not sure, Kyle, if you muted Dan there, or if Dan had any more questions. But there, Dan, did you have any more questions, or was that it?
A real quick question, just that I'm sure that everybody's thinking it, is just that if we wanted to do the sewer drainage at the curb and whatever, does that automatically extend the width of the road, or can it be kept at 16 or 18 feet and still have curb and gutter, I guess, and no sidewalk?
Yeah, curb and gutter without sidewalk is certainly an option. It wouldn't necessarily, it wouldn't have to be just added on to the end, but it's generally not considered for conveying traffic, I guess, if that's to answer that. So in general, we would assume that, vehicles would stay within the asphalt pavement. And then the curb and gutter is, again, as Paul mentioned earlier, is primarily for storm drainage. So that would be in addition to. So while it wouldn't widen the road excessively, it would probably add, 1.5 or 2 total width to the whole thing. So.
Gotcha. Thank you.
The only other comment I would make about that is, for instance, if we were going to keep with a width like face to face, a curb is 16 feet, that's really tight. If anybody needs to get off the edge of the roadway, they basically have to then, the tires have to go up and over the curb.
Yeah.
It makes it very difficult for 2 vehicles to pass. So that's why we look at basically a minimum width with curb and gutter. So probably at a minimum, we'd want 18 feet of asphalt pavement, I would think 18 to 20, just of the asphalt itself. And then you would have the curb and gutter on the outside of that asphalt, which curb and gutter itself is 2 feet wide. So that basically then 4 feet total. So if you have an 18-foot wide roadway or asphalt portion of the roadway, you'd end up with 22 feet back to back of the curb. So, and that would probably be an absolute minimum that we would consider. And that's even deviating from our own standards, which we typically don't like to do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Dan and Shannon. And it is 7:40, but we can stick around here for about 5 more minutes. We can circle back to Mr. Harrows. Kyle, if you can go ahead and unmute him again, we can entertain a couple more questions.
I did just want to say again, just a reminder to anybody that's still on listening, physical comment cards will arrive at your home. You can also fill out the one online, and you can also email or call Ken or I. Our contact information is here, and as well as the Trails End specific website. So go ahead, Kent.
Yeah, well, and now seeing this way to contact you again, I don't want to take up any more of your time on an evening like this. So I just say thank you for entertaining our questions, and I imagine several of us will probably just follow up offline then with some other questions and whatnot. So I guess for tonight, I'll just leave it with a thank you for listening to our concerns, and hope we can partner together as we go through this to find what the right balance is between resident needs and city needs and whatnot. So thank you.
Yeah, and our intent was never to force anything upon anyone. That's part of the reason why we want to make sure that everybody gets their voice heard. So if you do speak to everybody again or individually, just ask them to go ahead and fill out that physical comment card they have. We also put return envelopes that are already stamped, ready to go. All you got to do is stick it right back in your mailbox once you fill it out. So it's as easy as I could make it for you guys. So feel free to fill those out. Give us the information and let your opinion be heard, and we'll make sure that the project that the neighborhood wants is what comes through. So.
Oh, I told you I wouldn't ask any more questions, but I guess now that I thought of it, I don't know if you had street width in that survey. Oh, if it already went out, then it must be too late, but we can address that offline. But yep, thank you.
And the one other thing I would say is, the comment cards and what we've asked for is really your input, which we will share at a staff level, and then possibly on to city council. The funds for the improvements to the roadway, the curb and gutter, sidewalk, have not yet been programmed. They would be in our capital improvements program update that council would consider in August, September of this year. So that's why we want to know at this time, what the input is from the residents, and that'll guide the decision whether to fund those improvements or not. And then we'll provide that on the city council. And then I think, as Brian and Lindsay have said, this won't be the only conversation we have with the neighborhood about this project. As we continue to the design process, we know what's going to happen with curb and gutter and sidewalk. We will certainly be following up with the neighborhood and then continuing to talk through the design process for this project. So you're going to be seeing more of us. We're gladly going to be having further conversations with all of you.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to thank everyone for giving up your time this evening, for joining us and for participating, and for all of the work you've done leading up to this. Please go ahead and fill out those comment cards. Even if you've taken part in the neighborhood survey, fill out the comment cards so that we have those in our possession. Or you could fill it out online at dublinohiousa.gov/trailsend. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thanks, Brian, Paul, Aaron, Ken, and Robert, and everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.